Sometimes it's important to stop and recognize a big moment when it happens. And today, that big moment was this one. A vaccine for the coronavirus administered for the first time in the United States. And while hope is warranted, there are 300,000 reasons why complacency is not. And even when you and I get the vaccine, life won't just magically snap back to normal. It's important to know why. Plus, the blockade is open and an agreement is in sight. But with tens of thousands of evictions potentially on the horizon, is the Red House saga the new normal?
It could be an ongoing phenomenon.
Here's the story.
Just love that handwriting. It's so bizarre. Hey, everybody, I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. You might have noticed off the bat, there are two very different things about the show tonight. First up, yours truly. Dan has the day off. He'll be back, we promise. It was pre-planned, so he'll be back tomorrow. Second, I'm clearly not in the studio. And the reason, frankly, is because I'm quarantining from my coworkers right now. And the reason for that is that recently I covered a story that put me in close contact with a lot of other people. Now, I want to be clear, especially because I'm sure my mom is watching. We have no idea if any of those people were infected, but we just have no reason to think. We have no reason right now to think that they were or that they weren't. We're just being really safe. And I'm keeping my distance to keep all of my coworkers safe. We practice what we preach here. It's just what we do. Other than that, everything else is the same, including the contact info at the bottom of the screen. You can see it. #HeyDan. Email thestory@kgw.com. We'll be answering a few of your specific questions tonight. And with that, let's get started. And as we do, I want us all to think back to a specific day in March. And I know most of us probably can't remember what we ate for dinner last night, or frankly, the last time that we put on pants with anything but an elastic waist. That's a personal note. But the point is, how are we supposed to remember a specific day like 9 months ago? Well, I think you're going to remember this one. I'll give you a hint. Actually, I'll give you two hints. The NBA and Tom Hanks. Yeah. March 12th. The day the COVID-19 reality set in for most of America. It was a really scary day. That was the one the actor, of course, announced that he and his wife were sick and that the NBA postponed the rest of the season. It was bizarre. I have a feeling it's a day we won't forget anytime soon. But neither is today. And for the complete opposite reason. That is Sandra Lindsay, an ICU nurse from Queens, New York, becoming the first human in the U.S. to receive a COVID-19 vaccine without being part of a trial. Now, if you're like me, that video probably brings the most hope that you've felt since that dark day in March. It finally feels like we can see our way out of this pandemic. It's huge, but that sigh of relief comes with an enormous reality check. Also today, the United States passed another milestone. Look at that headline. This would have seemed unthinkable back in March, but 300,000 coronavirus deaths here in the U.S. That's the new benchmark, 300,000. So as we talk a lot about the vaccine tonight, it's just important. We want to point this out off the top to keep the stakes in mind. We still have a long path ahead of us, and we cannot let up. But for the first time, the end of the journey is in sight. And that's definitely worth celebrating. So that's why it is our big story. All right, so there we go. Today, a FedEx plane landed in Portland carrying 975 doses of the most precious cargo imaginable. Look at this video. The first batch of the coronavirus vaccine arriving here in the state. A portion immediately went to Legacy's Holiday Park location. The rest to Meridian Park in Tualatin. And then that's not it, though. Get this. Tomorrow, another batch of 975 doses will arrive in Ontario, Oregon. By Wednesday, Portland's VA Medical Center is expecting another 3,000 doses. More than 19,000 additional doses will arrive at Portland area hospitals throughout the week, and nearly 11,000 doses going to skilled nursing facilities, with even more shipments, with even more big numbers that we won't expect you to remember to follow in the weeks ahead. It's huge. All in all, it's been less than a year since the first case in the U.S. to the first vaccine injection. Less than a year between those 2 points. Before this year, before this pandemic, the fastest that scientists were able to manufacture a vaccine for a novel virus like this was 4 years. So we are witnessing a scientific wonder unfolding before our very eyes. That said, it's not without hiccups because it's 2020, isn't it? There are a lot of big questions, maybe the biggest of which who is going to get the vaccine next? 35,000 frontline healthcare workers in Oregon are expected to get their first shot this week. But after that, it gets a little murky. We talked to Pat Doris about why we don't know the answer yet. All right, KGW's Pat Doris joining me now on. Pat, we were just saying it's such a historic day. You know as well as I do, we've been getting so many questions from people about everything tied to this vaccine distribution. So I want to read a couple of them to you now. First up, are hospitals using all the doses that they're getting in this first round right away, or are they kind of stockpiling some of them?
Well, it's a great question. They should be using all of them. The government is saying, listen, the DOD, Department of Defense, is coordinating all of this, and they want every one of those doses to go into a person. They do not want them holding half of them back because they're going to get more and more shipments coming in. So they should be using all of them. And
how often will they get new shipments that we know of?
Pretty much every week. There's 35,000 total coming in this week in Oregon, and then there's tens of thousands next week and tens of thousands the week after that. We don't know 2 and 3 months down the road, but it will probably be even more. I mean, the governor last week talked about inoculating as many as 10,000 people a day, which, by the way, will take almost a year to reach the goal of 3 million. But there's going to be a lot coming in.
Okay. And then one question that we've been getting a ton, maybe this is the most the most frequent one. When will the Oregon Health Authority determine the order as to who gets their shots when? When is that full list and full order coming out?
Well, you would think that this would already be done. And I sort of want to be a little snarky and remind them that Christmas is the 25th of December. But they have so far only done the 1A. So it's the healthcare workers and the janitors and the food service people and the security people, all the people in the hospital that are going to come into contact with COVID. But then it's that level B, which is starting to get into other people like maybe prisoners and maybe teachers and things like that. They have not decided that yet. They say they're going to put together a panel to decide that. They probably do have a little bit of lag time because they want to get all the healthcare workers across the state vaccinated first. And there's some 300,000 of those, I think. But still, come on, they should be on top of that. And really, we should have had the answer probably a couple of months ago.
All right. Pat Doris, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet. My pleasure.
I love when Pat gets blunt. All right, that was reporter Pat. Now to viewer Pat, who asks a key question tonight. If you are vaccinated, is it okay for you to be with others who you know were also vaccinated without social distancing, without wearing a mask? Viewer Pat, that's an awesome question. We really appreciate you writing in. So the science actually doesn't have a clear answer yet. The answer is there's no answer right now. So your best bet is to be on the safe side, the experts say. Basically, the vaccine, as we understand it, is extremely effective at preventing people from getting sick from COVID-19. But, and this is key, there are still a lot of questions as to whether the vaccine prevents people from contracting the virus and then spreading it to other people. In other words, you could still be a carrier, they say. They don't know right now. Of course, your question specifically mentioned other people who have also gotten the vaccine. Again, specifically, all of the recommendations we're hearing from doctors say we should continue doing what we've been doing for most of 2020, which means wearing masks, social distancing, and staying home as much as possible. The vaccine is a huge step, don't get us wrong, but it's not an on-off switch. And of course, as the science gets better, so will our understanding, so the answers could change. But in the meantime, from what we know now, it's just better to be safe than sorry. And again, we appreciate the question. Thank you. We have another one from Chung Kim. They asked, can you do a story on the side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine? Great question. So while the vaccine has been tested on thousands of adults and deemed safe, there are some side effects to be aware of. So Dr. John Torres with NBC News lays out some of them for us. Take a look.
Now, most of us won't be getting a vaccine until around the springtime. But once you do get it, don't be surprised if you feel some minor side effects. That's normal with most vaccines, and if you know what to expect, you can be prepared. The most common side effects with the Pfizer vaccine are fatigue, headache, pain at the injection site, and muscle aches. They usually kick in around 24 to 48 hours after the second dose, and typically people feel better within a day or two. If you experience any of these after you get the vaccine, you can take ibuprofen or acetaminophen to help relieve the symptoms. The recommendation is to wait to take these until the symptoms start up and not beforehand. But it's important to remember side effects are common with most vaccines, and this one is no different. It simply means your immune system is revving up to fight off an infection.
All right, good to know. So, by the way, as for people with severe allergies, it's just best to have a conversation with your doctor if you're concerned about how this vaccine might affect you. But leading doctors say potential serious reactions are most likely very rare.
We're talking about people's lives.
The blockade may be lifted at the Red House, but Mayor Wheeler has a message for activists who are calling this a win.
You need to reevaluate.
And tears in the Washington state capitol.
As you can see, this is getting me today.
As the Electoral College does its constitutional duty and casts its final votes, deciding our next president once and for all.
This is democracy in action.
When the story continues.
Welcome back to The Story without Dan Haggerty. Everybody else hates that joke. I think it's funny. I'm Maggie Vespa. I'm in for Dan tonight. He just took a day off. He needed a break, and he'll be back tomorrow. Until then, though, our contact info is always the same. You can see it at the bottom of your screen. Hashtag HeyDan to talk to us on Twitter or Instagram, or you can just email thestory@kgw.com. You can reach out to us on Facebook as well. We seriously read everything, and we get back to as many people as possible. And I'll be sure to read some comments at the end of the show if we don't get around to them earlier. But you saw our questions in the A block. I mean, this drives our coverage for sure. And I do want to continue tonight, though. We're going to switch gears a little bit with a peaceful resolution that, to be frank, could have gone a very different way. Like, truly, this could have ended badly, and we're so glad it didn't. In fact, all signs, though, early last week pointed to an explosive ending when a group of protesters occupied a slice of North Mississippi Avenue to prevent the city from evicting a BIPOC family, a Black Indigenous family, who had defaulted on their home. We saw clashes between occupiers and police, even some members of the media. And with this year's months of protests barely in the rearview mirror, we all kind of had an idea of at least where we were afraid this could end up. But again, it didn't, fortunately. And today, that blockade on Mississippi is over. The barricades are lifted, and the Kinney family, who owned the so-called Red House on Mississippi, are reportedly in talks with the developer who bought the house at a foreclosure auction in 2018. Mayor Wheeler says they have reached an agreement in principle. His words there. And the developer indicated last week, he actually texted me, that he may be willing to sell the house back to the Kinneys at cost, which may not be a problem considering the community has raised around $300,000 for that family. Also worth noting, the family owns a second home a couple of miles away with a market value of about $600,000. So, happy ending, right? Well, it might be more complicated than that, at least some experts say, and it all comes down to whether activists see today as not only a win, but as a tactic to prevent even more evictions down the road, evictions that seem inevitable as COVID-19 protections expire at the end of the year. To that, Mayor Wheeler said at a press conference this morning that he didn't see today as a win for those activists. And then he brought us our quote of the day, saying, quote, "If you think that negotiating at the head of a gun is a win, you need to reevaluate," end quote. Then he added this.
My goal is not to intimidate. My goal is not to hold a gun and wave a gun in people's faces and say, do it my way or the highway. My goal is still to find de-escalated solutions that protect the lives of the men and women in the Portland Police Bureau, the lives of the neighbors who are in the immediate vicinity of the occupation, and yes, the lives of people who are there participating in these demonstrations. This could have gone in a very different direction, and it could have gone that way quickly.
And the mayor was blunt this morning. So, I mean, the big question, is this the new normal? Are occupations going to be sort of a precedent from here on out? Since frankly, it seemed to work this time. So we wanted to talk more about what the Red House occupation means moving forward. I turned to Dr. Randy Blazak. He's a sociology professor at Portland State University. Here's what he said.
You know, civil disobedience is a continuum from a peaceful sit-in to something that's a little bit more aggressive and perhaps destructive. And so we're always somewhere on that continuum of civil disobedience when we have protests like this. And I think, you know, what came into play here is not the sovereign citizens element, which ultimately doesn't play out because that's an appeal to the legal issues behind foreclosure, not the sort of armed element that was there, but really the kind of community forcing the city to take a look at itself and forcing this conversation. Hey, you say you have these values, we're going to hold the mirror up to your face very closely, and you're going to have to see which side you're on. And sometimes it takes a lot of people coming out to hold up that mirror and to be very dramatic. Those folks help to bring the attention of the media, including the national media and maybe even the world media. And so that sort of forces the conversation. Whether or not that tactic is useful in every single eviction issue is another matter, because sometimes it will be shut down quickly. And I think probably the thing that makes it unique in Portland is that we are kind of open about our past and reconciling with our past. And we're a little bit more willing to say, hey, there is a history here. And I think this is, if we want to sort of draw a parallel when we look at how changes happen in nations, when we see dramatic upheaval of nations, whether it's the former Soviet Union or South Africa, it's when there's a time of reform, when things loosen up a little bit and people are saying, okay, we will admit that we have some problems. And then all of a sudden there's a tipping point where things change more radically and more rapidly. And so we're kind of a little version of a nation that is sort of having this conversation with itself in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and all the things that came out in 2020. All right, we promote these values. What are we actually doing about it? So we're in this moment of reform where things like this can actually happen. You think when things are the most oppressive, that's when the revolution is going to happen. But when we look at historical models, it's when things loosen up, like perestroika under Gorbachev. You know, when things get a little bit loosey-goosey and people start saying, hey, yeah, we need to deal with our bad history and our bad behavior, then all of a sudden there is a massive shift. And I think that's kind of where Portland is in this conversation that we're having that allows there to be these sort of big shifts in the way that we're actually doing diversity.
You don't normally hear Gorbachev and loosey-goosey. Yeah. Like that. I had to point it out. That caught me off guard. All right, Dr. Blazak did say, by the way, that he could see something like this happening again because, yeah, there is now a precedent, especially as Portland continues to gentrify. All right, we're going to change gears again. Might have heard, today is the day that Joe Biden officially became president-elect of the United States. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean this. The actual human beings who make up the Electoral College got together in their various state houses across the country, and they cast their votes for president. One vote for every member of Congress a state has. So 7 in Oregon, 12 in Washington, 538 across the entire country. And if you're wondering, hold the phone. Didn't we already vote like before Election Day and that whole buildup? We talked about it a lot. The mail system was up in arms. Yes, we did. We did vote, but our votes actually don't directly decide the president. We get a lot of questions about the Electoral College. Our votes decide on whether the state picks a group of Democratic or Republican electors. And today those electors voted, and it's their votes that decide the ultimate winner. And as expected, everything went according to the electoral map that we all anxiously watched on Election Day, or quite frankly, Election Week, as it's now referred to. President Trump received 232 votes. Joe Biden, former Vice President Biden, received 306 votes. More than enough to win. In Oregon, our seven electors met in Salem at 1:30, and they dropped their ballots for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Washington's 12 electors met at noon. They did the same thing. And it turns out these things are live streamed. Who knew? I mean, yeah, this does happen every 4 years, but quite frankly, we never pay that close of attention to it because it's not normally that big of a deal. It's just kind of a procedural thing. Usually whoever is the projected winner on election night just cruises over to the inauguration on January 20th without any controversy. But of course, nothing is normal about this year, right? We all know that. President Trump and his legal team have been fighting tooth and nail with mostly frivolous lawsuits to overturn elections in swing states in particular. They're claiming voter fraud despite not showing any evidence. But because of all of their challenges, there has, of course, been extra scrutiny on how the elections systems work. And in some cases, there has been a lot of tension. In Arizona, for example, electors met at an undisclosed location, fearing for their safety. In Pennsylvania and Georgia, the losing GOP party attempted to get their own electors to cast votes in defiance of the popular vote in that state. And in recent history, there has never been an election so fraught and so closely watched. So today in Olympia, when Washington's Republican Secretary of State Kim Wyman spoke to the electors gathered in the Capitol, it's kind of not that surprising. At this procedural moment, she got emotional. Take a listen.
This is a moment in our country's history where electors in state capitals across America are convening to cast their votes on behalf of the voters of their respective states. As you can see, this is getting me today. While some people continue to call into question the outcome of this election, average citizens from all walks of life will step up today to exercise their responsibility to perform their constitutional duty to the best of their ability and cast their ballot for President and Vice President of the United States of America. The results will be sent to Congress to begin the next steps in the inauguration process. This is an important ceremony. This is the American way of governance. This is democracy in action.
It's really crazy to hear her get choked up there, but I mean, we get it. Okay, so what does happen next now that this is done? Well, after today's electoral vote, the sealed election results are sent to Washington, D.C., and then before both the Senate and the House, the Constitution calls upon the President of the Senate to tally the votes and announce the winner. The President of the Senate is the Vice President, Mike Pence. So it will fall upon him on January 6th to announce before Congress and the nation that President Trump lost the election to Joe Biden. And then all that is left to do after that is inaugurate the next president. And that will happen on January 20th. But I'm sure a lot of people have the same question, actually, that viewer Debbie Peterson did. She emailed us asking, who are Oregon's electors for the Electoral College? That's a great question. Again, we don't normally pay that much attention to this. Here are their names. Recognize any? I mean, don't worry if you don't. They're not really well-known people. And I don't mean that, again, as an insult. We just don't normally watch it this closely. We've got the chair and the vice chair of Oregon's Democratic Party, and we've got various members of Oregon's congressional districts. One of them is this guy, Nathan Schultz. At 23, he is the youngest person to ever serve as a delegate in Oregon. As you can see, we had the opportunity to talk to him today, and even though he was one of the 7 people picked to cast an electoral vote, he says he supports abolishing the Electoral College in favor of a national popular vote.
Establishing a genuine popular vote for the presidency is something that I wholeheartedly support. I think the Electoral College is an antiquated institution. It was founded on racism and prejudice and bigotry and the suppression of so many people. So even what it represents is really bad for our country, but in practice, it's also very bad for our country.
All right, so if you've never heard that association before, it's okay. We're going to explain it now. The idea that the Electoral College is racist is a pretty common idea in progressive circles. And the idea specifically being the Electoral College was founded at a time when Black Americans were enslaved and they couldn't vote. And they were, of course, we now know this famous fraction, 3/5 of a person. So since there were more Black Americans in the South, those southern states got more electoral votes than the North, because of their higher populations. That gave the slave states more voting power, even if no Black Americans were allowed that power themselves, of course, until 1870. So today, Oregon is one of 15 states, and also the District of Columbia, to join a pact promising their electoral votes to the national popular vote winner. But the problem is that pact doesn't go into effect until enough states sign on with enough electoral votes to determine the presidency. So we'll obviously keep track of that. We've talked about it here on the story before. It's really interesting. All right, all that in mind, we are back with your comments. Again, we promise we read them, so keep writing in after the break. Stick around. All right, I'm going to be honest. I talk slower than Dan, so we don't have a ton of time right now. But I'm going to read one question. Someone wrote in, Jamie Thomas, and said, I think your without Dan Haggerty joke was great. Jamie, thank you so much. My humor is ridiculous and very dry, so I appreciate it. That said, we are getting a ton of vaccine questions, and you'll be happy to know we have a team here at KGW and a team on the story devoted to finding the answers to those. That's why we had them in our A block of the show today. So keep sending in your vaccine questions. We're sending them to our team. They'll get the answers from the experts, and then we'll bring them back to you tonight and throughout the week as this rollout continues. It's going to be a while, so send them all in. We appreciate them. And just, hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate that too. Dan is back tomorrow again, but I really appreciate you hanging out with me. And we have this news at 6:30 coming up next. For now, that does it for The Story. Have a great night, everybody.